Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Zahra Mushtaba, and with me is R.S. Raghu, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. The headlines: Sweden and Finland sign accession protocols with Nato. External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, to participate in the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Bali on Thursday. U.S. President Joe Biden expresses grief over shootout in Chicago. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh asserts that India attaches great importance to strategic partnership with France. Filing of nominations in India's vice presidential election begins. And in sports, in tennis, Novak Djokovic beats Yannick Sinner to enter the Wimbledon men's singles semi-finals. And in hockey, India and China play out a 1-all draw at the FIH Hockey Women's World Cup in Spain. And now the news in detail. Sweden and Finland signed the accession protocols at the NATO headquarters on Tuesday. The signing was held in the presence of Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto and Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde. A report.
The signing comes days after the trilateral memorandum between Turkey, Finland and Sweden. Turkey had initially opposed the Nordic countries' entry into the group, alleging that the two nations are providing shelter to Kurdish separatists. Turkey lifted its opposition at the trilateral summit in Madrid last week based on certain conditions. The signing of the accession protocols marks the start of the ratification process. In a statement, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg terms the signing as historic.
This is an historic day for Finland, for Sweden, for NATO and for Euro-Atlantic security.
The 30-member NATO group seeks to promote collective security among its members. The collective defense principle laid out in the NATO Charter states that an armed attack against any of its members is considered an attack against them all. NATO membership is open to any European state in a position to further the principles of the treaty and to contribute to the security of the North Atlantic area. The development is significant, coming in the backdrop of the Ukraine conflict. Russia opposes the eastward expansion of NATO and Finland is Russia's neighbor. Mr. Stoltenberg said that NATO's door remains open to Europeans as they face what he termed as the biggest security crisis in decades. Anita Anand for World News, AIR.
In the United States, 6 people were killed and more than 24 wounded in a mass shooting incident at the July 4th Independence Day parade in the suburb of Highland Park outside Chicago, Illinois, Monday night. Expressing angst over the shooting, U.S. President Joe Biden said that senseless gun violence has yet again brought grief to an American community on its Independence Day.
Our economy is growing, but not without pain. Liberty is under assault both here and abroad. In recent days, there's been reason to think that this country is moving backward, that freedom is being reduced, that rights we assumed were protected are no longer. But tonight, I want you to know we're going to get through all of this. I know many Americans look around today and see a divided country and are deeply worried about that fact. I understand, but I believe we're more united than we are divided. Even more, I believe it's a choice we make, and I believe it's within our power to choose unity.
Earlier, authorities reportedly said that a 22-year-old man was taken into police custody after hours-long manhunt. The July 4 shooting was the latest in the shooting incidents in the United States.
Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe told the Parliament on Tuesday that the first round of discussions with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) has been a success, but the assistance depends on the debt restructuring program. Local media reports that making a special statement in the House, Mr. Wickremesinghe said Sri Lanka will hand over a debt restructuring program report to IMF in August this year. Mr. Wickremesinghe said by the end of this year, inflation will rise to 60%. He added that it is mainly due to the increase in the prices of the goods in the world and the fall in the value of the rupee. The Prime Minister said that the government is working to control inflation. External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, will be on a 2-day visit to Bali, Indonesia from Thursday to participate in the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. Indonesia is holding the meeting within the framework of Indonesia G20 presidency. The meeting will discuss current issues such as strengthening multilateralism and current global challenges, including food and energy security. During the visit, the minister is also expected to hold several bilateral meetings with his counterparts from the other G20 member states and invited countries. In a statement, India's External Affairs Ministry said that as a G20 Troika member and as the incoming G20 presidency, India's role in the upcoming meet assumes even greater importance. It added that India is currently extending steadfast support to the Indonesian presidency and will be taking forward discussions on contemporary global challenges with a view to achieving meaningful outcomes during India's presidency. Elsewhere, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said that in the last 8 years, Prime Minister Narendra Modi always advocated for neighbourhood first policy. Participating at a discussion on Modi at 20 Dreams Meet Delivery in New Delhi on Tuesday, Dr. Jaishankar said the vision of Modi government is towards the development and prosperity of the entire neighbourhood. Dr. Jaishankar said India has stepped up in assisting Sri Lanka, which is facing an economic crisis.
In the last 8 years, for example, we are both power exporter and importer from Nepal. The same thing with Bangladesh. We are supplying fuel to a lot of our neighbors. You saw Sri Lanka is in difficulties right now. We have stepped forward to assist them. So this whole idea of India actually as a lifting tide, which is able to lift the entire neighborhood, and a lot of it is human.
India and Iran discussed various elements of bilateral relations, including progress on the Chabahar port. Foreign Secretary Vinay Kwatra held a telephonic conversation with the Deputy Minister for Political Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Dr. Ali Bagheri Kani, on Tuesday. Mr. Kwatra underscored India's commitment to strengthen bilateral cooperation with Iran in addressing shared opportunities and challenges. Both sides also discussed international and regional issues, including Afghanistan. A high-level delegation of French aircraft engine maker Safran Group, led by its CEO Olivier Andrier, called on Defence Minister Rajnath Singh in New Delhi on Tuesday. Safran is one of the leading original equipment manufacturers of advanced aircraft engines for civil and fighter jets. During the meeting, the CEO of Safran briefed the minister of their company's plans to set up a maintenance, repair and overhaul or MRO facility in India. The CEO also briefed Mr. Singh of the plan to inaugurate Safran aircraft engines and Safran Electrical and Power India Private Limited in Hyderabad and Safran HAL aircraft engines as a joint venture in Bengaluru. The MRO facility in Hyderabad will produce parts and components for advanced aircraft engines and is expected to create several highly skilled jobs. Mr. Rajnath Singh noted the importance India attaches to the strategic partnership with France. He welcomed the new facilities in Hyderabad and Bengaluru. Mr. Singh also invited Safran for more co-development and co-production projects in India, in tune with Make in India, Make for the World, and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which implies self-reliance of the Government of India. He said India is a big market and Safran can leverage all the competitive advantages, including the cost advantages and availability of trained manpower. Mr. Singh asserted that both the countries can contribute to each other's capability building.
India is taking part in one of the largest multilateral naval exercises, the Rim of the Pacific Exercise or RIMPAC. Indian Navy's indigenous frigate INS Satpura and P-8I LRM-RASW aircraft are at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii for the multilateral naval exercises. The harbor phase of the exercise saw participation in multiple symposiums, exercise planning discussions and sports competitions. The crew also visited the historic museum ship USS Missouri and paid homage to fallen soldiers who made the supreme sacrifice during World War II at USS Arizona Memorial. In Sudan, coup leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said that the army would make way for a civilian government on Monday. For months, protesters on the streets of Sudan have been making the demand and have been supported by the international community. Mr. Burhan said that the military would no longer participate in national talks facilitated by the UN and regional blocs. The announcement came months after the October coup, which ousted civilians from a transitional administration, sparking widespread international condemnation and aid cuts.
Uganda has announced the discovery of 31 million metric tons of gold deposits in the country. A spokesperson from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in Uganda, Solomon Mueta, said that these reports are aimed at attracting gold miners and investors. In a bid to boost the country's economy, the Ugandan government has licensed Wagagai Gold Mining Company, a Chinese firm, to start producing gold products in the Busia district. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle @AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to World News. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India's rising merchandise exports and economic growth. In conversation are A.K. Bhattacharya, an economic analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, AIR correspondent.
AKB, if you look at the figures for the month of April and then for the month of May, when it comes to the trade data, imports and exports, the trade deficit has only gone up month on month and definitely year on year. What are the principal reasons?
Well, when you are trying to understand the trade data, it is probably not fair to just look at the trade deficit data, because trade deficit data will only tell us about our ability to meet the gap over a period of time. Remember that these trade deficit data pertain only to merchandise goods. They don't cover the services exports, and we have very little imports. So whatever may be the trade deficit, that will to some extent impact our overall ability to meet the gap, but that gap by and large is more than met by our services exports. So the point I would like to make is that within the trade data, we should look at both exports and imports segmentally, in a different way. For example, exports growth has decelerated. In May, it was around 21% growth, and in June, it has come down to around 17% growth. And within the exports category, what we do see is that it is largely led by petroleum products, and actually in some of the categories, like engineering goods, or fabric, or yarn, or made-ups, plastic, linoleum, they have seen a decline. So therefore, our exports are growing by 16%. There is a deceleration in exports, and we are seeing this export growth of 16% compared to 20% of June, and that too because of higher petroleum product prices. So that is point number one. You look at the imports, what really happens in imports, out of the total component of imports, you have large segment composed of petroleum products once again. So break down the figure of total imports of around 64 billion in June. Out of 64 billion, $20 billion is accounted by petroleum products. Another $6 billion is accounted by coal. Another $2 billion is accounted for by gold. Now these are the three big items which have actually skewed your import figure. Now, if you did not have a coal crisis at home, you wouldn't have imported so much coal. If the equity markets had behaved more reasonably, then probably people wouldn't have gone in for higher yellow metal import and parked their money there. Similarly, if crude oil prices had not gone up, your import bill wouldn't have gone up to $20 billion for June alone. So therefore, the point I'm making is that yes, our exports have decelerated, our imports have risen very fast because of these three big items of crude oil, petroleum products, coal and gold. But remember that the core imports, which is non-petroleum and non-gems and jewelry import, have also grown up, and that growth is quite substantial. Now, which means that the domestic demand is quite good and quite strong. So that's a very important point that we need to recognize while we are analyzing trade data.
Well, there might be a fourth point also, AKB, about the depreciating rupee to the dollar. How concerned is the central bank about it?
Well, I think the rupee depreciating is actually a good thing for exports, because when your rupee depreciates, then your exports by and large get more competitive. So I don't think we should look at rupee depreciating in a negative way. Actually, if rupee depreciates, then there is a natural check on imports and your export competitiveness gets better. So what is happening on the rupee front is actually a reflection of our inflation rate and the demand for more dollar, where the demand supply mechanism is at work. So if the Reserve Bank of India obviously is intervening in the foreign exchange market, because it does not want any volatility or sharp depreciation of the rupee. So it is trying to calibrate the fall of the rupee, and which is why Reserve Bank of India in the last few months have actually pumped in a lot of dollars. Look at the data from September 2021, and today Reserve Bank of India's foreign exchange reserves have actually gone down for around $640 billion to almost $590 billion. So Reserve Bank of India is definitely concerned. It is worried that this trade deficit might feed into current account deficit, and if that current account deficit gets out of control, then it may be causing some alarm bells. Right now, we are expecting that the current account deficit will probably go up from around 1.2% of GDP last financial year to around 3.1% of GDP. This is cause for concern, but remember, in the worst of crisis in 2013-14 or 2007-8, we used to have a current account deficit of over 4% of GDP. So we need to be cautious, and the government is obviously taking necessary steps. But let me say why exports have not done well in June. Because of challenges in the global supply chains, there are some bans on exports of India's commodities have been enforced because of domestic shortage fears like wheat. You had supplies of iron ore, some steel products, their exports, and now you have got latest decision is to impose an export duty on petrol and diesel. Therefore, our exports have also suffered. The deceleration has happened because of some of the decisions that have been taken to soften the inflation blow in the domestic economy.
Well, it's not just a cess that is being imposed on petroleum products, once they're refined on the imports, but also there is an increase in the customs duty on the import of gold, which has gone up from 7.5 to, I believe, 12.5% to curb shipments.
Absolutely, you are very right. Because of this excessive love for gold imports, would take an average thing of $2 billion per month, it might end up the year with around $24, $25, $30 billion. Now, this obviously causes two kinds of problems. One is that capital gets locked up in an asset which is actually idle. So your productive returns of your capital is less. And second is the pressure on the government's or the Reserve Bank of India's foreign exchange reserves goes up because people go in or get those foreign exchange from the market, buy it, and import gold by paying hard currency. So in both ways, gold imports need to be discouraged. But how it needs to be discouraged is a matter of debate, whether only imposing a duty on gold import would be good enough, or there should be other macroeconomic measures that need to be taken to discourage people from going in for gold imports and blocking their money in such imports.
Well, AKB, gold is usually purchased by the individual in India to hedge against inflation, and there is so much imported inflation going on for the four factors that we pointed out. You have an import bill consisting of crude oil, the import of coal, coke, and briquettes, gold, and of course, the depreciation of the rupee to the dollar. So how does inflation, how do you see that as a challenge for the government? How do you see them containing it while at the same time not compromising on the trade data, ensuring that they achieve the trade surplus instead of a trade deficit? And as you said, the current account deficit is under control.
Well, you are very right. I think the government should strike at the root of the problem, which to my mind is one of the root problems is inflation. Now, you also pointed out that much of this inflation is imported, but the worry is that this imported inflation fed itself into retail inflation in the domestic economy. Now, when you see the inflation rate is hovering at around 7%, whereas the upper tolerance band limit imposed by the Reserve Bank of India as per a Government of India Act is only 6%. So naturally, inflation becomes a problem and that needs to be tackled. Now, how do you tackle inflation? And how do you therefore discourage people from hedging against inflation through gold investments? One of the things is to make sure that the economy grows faster. And how does the economy grow faster? Right now, your investments are a little slow. So therefore, the government is going in for a rapid rise in its own capital expenditure. And the second thing is that the government starts collecting more revenues so that its overall borrowing limits stays under control. Now, as you would know that in the current year, the fiscal deficit is supposed to be around 6.4% of GDP. Now, there was a fear that the government had committed to expenditure which was more than what was projected in the budget. Almost around 3.36 lakh crore was to be spent more, either spent or revenue loss because of the excise duty cut on petrol and diesel. So there was a fear that the government might go out in the market and borrow more money. And if the government borrows more money, the first impact that it causes is the inflation in the economy gets higher because the liquidity gets more into the system. So therefore, by government committing itself to attaining a fiscal deficit target of 6.4% as promised in the budget presented in February 2022, actually the government is sending out a signal that it is very serious about controlling inflation. Because if the government does not borrow more, then it will certainly have positive impact on the kind of inflation that we're seeing right now. There are many other factors that are at play on inflation, but I think government's borrowing is certainly one of them.
Thank you so much, AKB.
Thank you.
The process of filing nominations for the 16th vice presidential election has begun with the issuance of notification by the Election Commission of India. Nominations can be filed till the 19th of this month. Vice presidential election will be held on the 6th of August. The Vice President of India is elected by an electoral college consisting of members of both houses of parliament in accordance with the system of proportional representation by means of the single transferable vote, and the voting in such election is by secret ballot. The electoral college to elect a person to the office of the Vice President consists of all members of both houses of parliament.
Researchers from Bengaluru's Jawaharlal Nehru Centre for Advanced Scientific Research have discovered a novel material called single crystalline scandium nitride that can emit, detect and modulate infrared light with high efficiencies. The discovery can be used for solar and thermal energy harvesting and for optical communication devices. K.C. Maurya and co-workers have utilized a scientific phenomenon called polariton excitations to achieve this feat. Electromagnetic waves are a renewable energy source used for electricity generation, telecommunication, defense and security technologies, sensors and healthcare services. Scientists use high-tech methods to manipulate such waves precisely in dimensions that are thousands of times smaller than the human hair using specialized materials. However, not all the wavelengths of light, especially infrared light, are easy to utilize since it is difficult to detect and modulate. And now a report from the world of business.
The Sensex lost 100 points to end at 53,134, while the Nifty slipped 24 points to settle at 15,811. At the global stock markets, the euro slipped to a two-decade low compared to the dollar. The steep surge in natural gas prices again added worries to the eurozone economy. As per the data available, it is evident that eurozone business growth slowed in last month. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index rose 0.1%, and Japan's Nikkei gained 1%. South Korea's Kospi was up 1.8%. Singapore's Straits Times was down by 0.5% and China's Shanghai Composite Index fell marginally by 0.4%. European shares followed losses in intraday trade. In intraday trade, oil prices dropped more than 1.5%. The Brent crude was trading at $111.70 per barrel, and at the forex market, the rupee weakened 42 paise against the dollar to close at 79 rupees and 37 paise against the American unit. Rajesh Lake for World News, All India Radio.
Moving on to sports, India and China played out a draw at the FIH Women's Hockey World Cup at Amstelveen in Netherlands. India was trailing by 1 goal in the Pool B match in the second quarter, but came back to equalize through a fabulous penalty corner by Vandana Kataria. Vandana was also declared the player of the match. Both India and China secured a draw in their respective first Pool B matches. India played out a pulsating 1-1 draw with England, while China also played out a 2-2 draw with New Zealand. Top seed Novak Djokovic comes from 2 sets down to beat Yannick Sinner at Wimbledon men's single quarterfinals. The final score was 5-7, 2-6, 6-3, 6-2, 6-2. With the result, the 6-time Wimbledon champion and defending champion will be playing his 11th Wimbledon semi-final. In cricket, England defeated India by 7 wickets in the rescheduled 5th Test match at Edgbaston in Birmingham on Tuesday. An unbeaten stand of 269 runs between Joe Root and Johnny Bairstow for the 4th wicket helped the hosts chase down a 378-run target in the 4th innings. This is their highest successful chase in the final innings of a test. The hosts resumed their innings at the score of 259 for 3 and got home quite comfortably as Root and Bairstow tore apart the Indian bowlers. On day 4, England got a target of 378 to win the 5th test after India were dismissed for 245 in their second innings shortly after lunch. In badminton, Indian shuttler Malvika Bansod crashed out of the ongoing Malaysia Masters 2022 competition, losing to Malaysia's Goh Jin Bee in the first round of the women's singles category in Kuala Lumpur today.
And now let's take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Bloomberg reports that China's Anhui province reported 231 COVID cases on Monday as authorities race to quash a flare-up that risks spilling over into one of the nation's most economically significant regions. Reuters reports that China on Monday rejected as an irresponsible smear a warning from the chief of NASA that China might take over the moon as part of a military program. South China Morning Post reports China's economy is expected to post its lowest quarterly growth rate in more than 2 years next week. Bloomberg headline says Xi Jinping's suppression of Hong Kong democracy pushes Taiwan further from China. Support for unification slumps as Taiwan's self-identity grows. China's one country, two systems lacks support in Taiwan.
The Rising Nepal reports that the Nepal Oil Corporation has suggested the government to implement a quota on fuel purchases, citing a shortage of funds to pay the oil suppliers amid soaring financial losses. Kathmandu Post reports that President Vidya Devi Bhandari administered the oath of office and secrecy to 3 Janta Samajwadi Party ministers on Monday.
Balochistan Post reports that a Chinese delegation called on Sindh Chief Minister Syed Murad Ali Shah to discuss the security situation of Chinese residents in the province. Balochistan Post reports that the Balochistan Liberation Front has claimed responsibility for the killing of 3 Pakistani soldiers in Baleda.
Pakistan Observer reports that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on Sunday assured the country that the risk of bankruptcy has been averted. Police have detained 9 Rohingya people from Noakhali's Companyganj Upazila after they fled the Bhashan Char Ashrayan project in the district's Hatia Upazila, reports Pratham Olo.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. Sweden and Finland sign accession protocols with Nato. External Affairs Minister of India Dr. Jaishankar to participate in the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Bali on Thursday. US President Joe Biden expresses grief over shootout in Chicago. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh asserts that India attaches great importance to strategic partnership with France. Filing of nominations in India's vice presidential election begins. And in sports, in tennis, Novak Djokovic beats Yannick Sinner to enter the Wimbledon men's singles semi-finals. And in hockey, India and China play out a 1-1 draw at the FIH Hockey Women's World Cup in Spain. And now, before we end, let's listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Algeria on their Independence Day. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.